I've been getting some questions about my creative process, so I thought now would be a good time to take you through the process for making an essay. Each video follows the same 7-step process, but things can look very different depending on the nature of the video. Also, my voice sounds a little bit weird because I'm sick right now. My creative process is fundamentally tied to how I process information. Before I consciously start working on a video, there's a secret 0th step where I'm consuming information. My brain is constantly taking in information from the world and trying to synthesize it into new ideas. When I'm engaging with media, the gears in my head are slowly turning as I process and try to understand what I'm experiencing. Most of my ideas for YouTube videos naturally arise from that interplay between my mind and the world. Sometimes I have the idea immediately when engaging with a text, but other times an idea will spontaneously pop into my head when I'm bored or thinking about something else as my brain continues to process what I've learned in the background. Most of the time, this happens when I'm in the shower, driving, or trying to fall asleep at night, because those are the 3 times I'm most often alone with my thoughts and I'm not experiencing external linguistic stimuli. Once I have the kernel of an idea, my mind starts to unpack it, which leads to the first real step of the creative process, ideation. Ideation is the most critical stage in a video's development. It's here that most videos either live and get made or die and remain uncreated. An initial idea can range from being incredibly specific to very vague. In the ideation phase, I will consider a video concept and think about how I could execute on it before actually starting work on the project. I'm pretty slow at making videos, so I have upwards of 10 ideas for every video that gets made, sometimes months or years before the video actually gets published. For example, as I write this, I have 10 video scripts in active consideration that have moved past ideation and into one of the later phases. Let's look at a few examples to see how ideation works. The Deepstone Crypt video is an example of an extremely vague idea coalescing from the ground up. It started with the idea to analyze Clovis Bray's Deepstone Crypt journal. I knew that there was a lot to unpack within the lore and wanted to process my thoughts by organizing them into an essay. Exactly what the thesis would be or where I would take the lore was very uncertain in ideation. The first step in ideating a video is almost always to make a Google Doc for the script and jotting a few notes down. If I don't have access to my computer, I will write the idea down in whatever medium is available to me, like the Notes app or on a piece of paper. Looking at the version history of the DSC script, we can watch the ideas become more concrete with time. I created the document for the DSC script on December 3rd, 2023, and by December 7th, I had a list of themes that I wanted to connect to the Deepstone Crypt journal. We can see from this screenshot that most of these ideas end up making their way into the video, but some of them are cut eventually, most notably the connections to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and the Blade Runner movies. The final shape and witness analysis is on the exact opposite of the spectrum, as I had a coherent thesis and structure in mind from the moment I had the idea for the video. This is because the video idea was a direct reaction to reading and processing IntelliJ. Like I mentioned for the behind the scenes of that video, in mid-April 2024, I had the idea to look at each disciple's interpretation of the final shape, and then end by looking at the precursors and the witness. You can even see in the Notes app idea that the final paragraph of the essay already exists, and remains largely intact in the final draft. This is particularly impressive because at this point, Into the Light has only just started, the final shape has not been released yet, but the thesis of the essay remains the same even after reading the story of the final shape and its lore, and the script is developed over the next 7.5 months. Destiny's duality of light and darkness is an interesting example because it started from an idea I had in therapy. I was reviewing the central concepts of wise mind, emotion mind, and reason mind from dialectical behavior therapy, and had the epiphany that each paracausal force can be said to represent a particular state in that framework. If you're unfamiliar, emotion mind is a state of mind where your emotions control you. You are unthinking and overfeeling. Under my analogy, this represents the chaos of paracausal light. Reason mind is a state of mind where your thoughts control you. You are unfeeling and overthinking. Under my analogy, this represents paracausal darkness. Wise mind is the dialectical synthesis of emotion mind and reason mind, taking the wisdom of both your thoughts and feelings into account before acting. This is prismatic in my analogy. Thinking about the light and darkness in a dialectical framework naturally led me to the idea that Destiny's Light and Darkness saga is philosophically about rejecting dogma and synthesizing them into dialectics after acquiring control of the darkness in Beyond Light and wielding it via prismatic in the final shape. At this point, I have a thesis and the beginnings of the structure for the video, but that structure changes a lot as I write the script, and the original idea for the video is only subtly implied and not explicitly stated, because that dialectical framework is more important than the specific analogies to dialectical behavior therapy. Once an idea is formed enough that I have a sense of what the video would be about, I begin the second step of the creative process, research. There isn't a hard and fast rule for when research begins. Sometimes I just have a few notes for things to look into, and other times I have a coherent thesis and structure in mind already. Looking back at the Deepstone Crypt video, by mid-December 2023, I had coalesced the themes into concrete ideas to explore in research. If you notice, based on the notes, I have a list of things to research. The bulk of this is either gameplay to record or Destiny lore to read. However, if I have a concrete connection I want to make to external topics, I will sometimes read relevant books or articles to use as sources. Most of these external topics are things I'm already at least somewhat aware of or familiar with, hence the connections my brain has made with the Destiny games. Sometimes I'm scanning a book that I've already read for quotes, and other times I'm reading a new book for the first time. Examples of books I was aware of but had not read prior to writing the relevant essays are the Divine Comedy for the Final Shape video and Reasons and Persons for the Deepstone Crypt video. When reading Destiny lore, I make heavy use of ishtarcollective.net, a community-run website that archives lore from the Destiny API. I find reading lore for research purposes much easier on Ishtar Collective, as it's searchable and copy-pastable unlike in-game. It also is helpfully sorted by release, unlike in-game where you have to navigate multiple sections of the collections and lore tabs to find relevant lore. However, Ishtar Collective only contains lore that's found in the API. For other sources like collector's editions I don't own, I rely on archives run by other community members, most notably the collector's edition archive curated by Ace of Hearts. If there's not a transcript provided for something, I will make one myself and usually link it in my bibliography. I would prefer not to rely on community-run archives for reading the lore, but Bungie's system in-game just leaves a lot to be desired to make it easily searchable, readable, and savable for research purposes. For new releases of collector's editions like IntelliChi, I purchased the collector's edition and read and transcribe quotes from the physical book myself. For in-game quotes and cutscenes, I will record gameplay myself when possible, and rely on Destiny's cutscene archives when not possible. With the lore, for research I use a technique from literary criticism called close reading. It involves reading a text multiple times, identifying key passages, and then deconstructing those passages into themes and analysis. During the research phase, I select key quotes from relevant material and transcribe or paste them into my Google Doc. At the end of the research process, I have a list of relevant quotes, probably containing more than will actually make it into the final video, plus some notes. Research doesn't ever completely end until a video script is complete, but at some point I transition to the next step, which is writing the first draft. I usually start by trying to write an introduction and conclusion. These are the two most important parts of the essay as they serve to introduce the viewer to the concepts I will explore, and to close out by reiterating the thesis and leaving the viewer with a lasting impression. About half the time, I don't have solid ideas for the conclusion at the beginning of the introduction, so I wait to write it until inspiration strikes. Otherwise, I will just start putting my thoughts into text form and naturally weaving them into an essay. Writing takes a lot of practice, but it's a skill I've honed throughout my life. At this point, it feels pretty natural to express my thoughts in paragraph and essay form, but this was not always the case. My creative writing has its origins in two places: the English and writing classes I took in school, and my love for the format of the video essay. As a teen, I was fascinated with the art of filmmaking and wanted to learn as much about it as possible. This led to me watching a lot of YouTube videos about making movies, some of which were short video essays about the craft of film. When I was a sophomore in high school, I had the epiphany that these video essays I loved watching were essentially the same thing as the essays my teachers were asking me to write about books in English class, just executed in a different style. This sparked an interest in essay writing that led me to develop my style as a video essayist in the late 2010s as I watched the modern genre of the long-form video essay emerge on YouTube. My writing style was largely fully formed from previous projects when I created the eforme channel in January 2023. During the writing process, I sometimes will have concrete sections already mapped out that I work on in a nonlinear order, but other times I won't, and will just find the structure of the essay as I write linearly. The latter situation tends to be much rarer these days, but notably happened with my Taken and Dread Sunder Doctrine essay. That essay didn't have a single section until after I finished the first draft. The Deepstone Crypt essay is the most nonlinear essay I've written for the channel, as I reordered sections multiple times in the writing and editing process. When concrete sections already exist, I will usually have grouped quotes into sections ahead of time. This makes the structure of writing each section easier, as I will make any points or arguments I need to, then proceed with a close reading of each individual quote in the order that makes the most logical sense, analyzing and unpacking the quotes. Sometimes that order changes around until I find something that works. My use of quotes is something that I struggle with. I am painfully aware that I have a tendency to use quote blocks that are excessively long. I find it difficult to strike a balance between showing off interesting writing that I know the majority of viewers will be unfamiliar with and not have read, and providing engaging analysis that moves the essay forwards. I try to make heavy use of ellipses where possible to remove unnecessary sentences and phrases from quotes, shortening them a bit, and breaking up large quotes into multiple smaller ones when possible. My goal is to avoid simply summarizing or explaining the lore that I analyze, because I find that boring. If people simply wanted to experience the lore unfiltered and without interpretation, I think they would be better served by just reading it themselves, even if Bungie's arcane delivery system leaves a lot to be desired. Once the script is written, it's time to move on to step 4, editing. I usually do anywhere from 1 to 4 full line edits of a script before I complete it. This is in addition to any editing of completed sections that happens during the first draft. Sometimes a script can change a lot in editing, with substantial additions and subtractions. For my longer form scripts, I often have my girlfriend read one of the later drafts and give me feedback. She doesn't know very much about Destiny, which I think helps gauge if the writing is interesting and coherent enough for someone without a ton of background on the subject to understand. I also obviously trust her perspective a lot, which helps me determine what things to cut. Often I already have an inkling of suggestions she will make, which helps confirm or deny my impressions about a script. After having her read an essay, I will do a final line edit of the script, then move on. Because the essay will ultimately be presented in video form, the next step is to record it as voiceover. I struggle with insecurities about my voice and vocal dysphoria, so this is often the most difficult part of the process for me. Unfortunately, estrogen doesn't affect your speaking voice, so I had to actively practice my speaking voice when transitioning. I learned to feminize my voice back in 2019 and 2020, and still practice some voice training exercises prior to and during recording sessions. I also have a tendency to get a sore throat when talking for long periods, so I have to break up my recording into multiple sessions, especially for larger videos. If a video is going to be a long form essay with a length exceeding an hour, I will also record my audio from different sessions in different files, as the software I use, Adobe Audition, tends to lag with long audio files, exceeding 2 hours. The microphone I use to record audio is a Shure SM7B. When recording, I will read through my entire script, stopping and restarting the sentence when I struggle with sentences or am interrupted. I'm very picky about my VO, so sometimes I will record problem sentences upwards of 10 times until I get it right. There also are sometimes sentences that are completely fine when written, but are challenging to read aloud. If I'm having difficulty with a sentence or notice that something should be reworded for clarity or emphasis, I will edit it on the fly while reading. I also sometimes ad-lib sentences if I think I've missed something. However, sometimes I'll find that something I ad-libbed is actually something I already anticipated in the script writing process and mentioned elsewhere, making it ultimately unnecessary. If this happens, the ad-lib portion will eventually get deleted. Ultimately, I'm familiar enough with what will work to read aloud and what won't on an instinctual level that I record exactly what's written for the vast majority of sentences. Because of the dynamic nature of the process, I view recording and editing audio as an extension of the script writing process. Even when I'm done editing the script, the content of the video is not finished being edited until the video is complete. Sometimes stuff still gets added or deleted. I edit my audio in Adobe Audition. I'm completely self-taught when it comes to video and audio editing, which are skills I've developed over the years I've produced videos for YouTube. To be 100% honest, EQing audio is a skill that I'm still developing. I understand how EQing works and generally what you're supposed to do, but don't have the best ear for it. I've messed around in the past with EQing via Audition's audio effects to varying degrees of success, but these days I run my microphone through Voicemeeter for live EQ, so I don't have to do much processing after the fact. I also have noticed that my voice has a pretty large dynamic range of volume, which makes my unprocessed voice harder to listen to for long periods of time. Recently, I've started running my audio through a single band compressor, using Audition's voice leveler preset to flatten some of that range for a better listening experience. I also run my audio through Audition's denoiser to remove any background buzzing from the audio. I usually will record silence at the end of each recording session to get a solid noise print for the denoiser. Once the audio effects are all applied, it's time to cut the content of the voiceover. I'm very picky about my voiceover and edit out every single breath, pause, and repeated take of each sentence. This is highly artificial and not naturalistic, but I think it helps the audio feel less jarring to listen to and helps it flow at a speed that doesn't allow a listener to get distracted as easily. I also just hate listening to recordings of myself breathing, so it's partially for me as well. I have so much practice editing my own voiceover that I can easily recognize breaths from the waveform ahead of time. I use a variety of custom keyboard shortcuts to make cutting audio really fast and natural, particularly making use of WASD, Q, and E for repetitive actions like stepping forwards, backwards, and zooming in or out. When the audio is completely edited, it will usually have shrunk in duration by a factor of 1.5 to 3, depending on how much difficulty I had recording the voiceover. These behind-the-scenes videos are edited much less meticulously than my normal videos, which is something I'm working on being okay with as a perfectionist. When the audio is done, I export the files from Audition and import them alongside any gameplay and music I will use into Adobe Premiere to edit the video. The voiceover will largely be complete by this point, but I do occasionally notice that I made a mistake in editing or forgot to record something, so I will quickly record and edit a small segment to insert the missing sentence during video editing. I also usually have the script open on my second monitor while editing the video to reference. This is helpful when I need to put quotes on screen or add titles for footnotes or citations. Editing the video usually means assembling the audio files on the video timeline, adding titles, music, graphics, and gameplay. I try to make the gameplay as relevant to the subject that's being discussed at any given time as possible, but sometimes I'm discussing topics that are so abstract that the gameplay is essentially whatever I have that's tangentially related. I try to use music from the officially released game soundtracks that's thematically relevant to what I'm talking about at any given time to add an extra degree of immersion to the listening experience. I always lower the volume to make sure my voice is clearly audible over it and not unnecessarily muddied by the addition of music. I usually don't add gameplay audio because it feels like an extra layer of noise, and often for cooperative content like raids, I don't have gameplay audio without comms. The visual production side of things could also use some improvement in the future, but without changing my audio editing workflow or recording VO with a face cam, gameplay is needed to give viewers something to look at. Once the video editing is done, the job of creating a video is essentially complete. The only steps left are to make a thumbnail or multiple thumbnails, upload to YouTube, and add metadata to the YouTube video. Standard stuff for YouTube, really, that doesn't take up a lot of time. My favorite parts of the process are research and script writing. I view my videos as essays first before videos, and try to make the writing as good as possible because I think that's my main strength as a creative. I hope you found this look into my creative process interesting. Let me know if you have any questions about my process in the comments. And of course, thank you for helping me fund videos by being a YouTube member.